Well, I was an active astronaut for 7 years, and during the 7 years, of course, I flew my 2 missions. When I went to NASA, I was still a commander. I was a Navy commander, and shortly after reaching NASA, I was promoted to a U.S. Navy captain. I was selected for my first space shuttle mission in '95, and actually flew that mission in January of '96. When I received word that I had been assigned to my first mission, it just was an absolute amazing feeling. It's exciting, you're elated, but you also realize the daunting task at hand.
We have a go for engine start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Endeavour in pursuit of a Japanese satellite.
My first flight, we flew on Endeavour. Endeavour was the newest of the space shuttles. The launch of a space shuttle is really an exciting occurrence. My first flight was at night. We launched at night. It was dark outside, obviously. It was very, very cold that night. As a matter of fact, it was the coldest launch that was planned since we lost Challenger. But I can remember riding out to the launch pad, going up to the 195-foot level at the pad on the gantry, walking across and climbing into the shuttle. You enter the shuttle about 3.5 hours before actual liftoff. There are suit technicians there to help you get partially dressed. Then when you actually climb in the shuttle, there's an astronaut inside to actually strap you in. Again, you enter the shuttle about 3.5 hours before actual liftoff. So during the next 3.5 hours, the NASA test directors and the crew are conducting systems tests, systems power up, and gradually checking everything until finally you're down to 7 seconds before liftoff. At 7 seconds, the ground launch sequence, the computer begins to start the main engines. You can feel them rumble. You can see your gauges, the engine gauges coming up on the dials, and you see the smoke and fire begin to billow up around the front windscreen. So you're sitting there, all this smoke and fire around the front windscreen, the thing is shaking and vibrating, and just about the time when I was asking myself, aren't we supposed to be going someplace? The clock hits 0 and the solid rocket boosters ignite, and then boom! It jumps off the pad. Surprised me, because when you see a spaceship take off on TV or in real life, it seems to float up in slow motion because they're so big. In reality, boom, it jumps off the pad, kicked me in the backside, and it was shaking and vibrating. We accelerate so fast that by the time we pass the top of the launch tower, we have exceeded 100 miles per hour. And I can remember the shuttle rolling over kind of upside down and then sort of rocketing off the horizon. I could look out the front window and see the horizon. And we passed Mach 1, the speed of sound on that flight, I think it was 43 seconds. So we left Earth 0 miles per hour and accelerated to 17,500 miles per hour in only 8.5 minutes. Once the engine shut off, now the acceleration is gone and you're thrown forward in your seat a little bit, and when the motion stops, everything starts to float, including you. But my seatbelts are holding me in, so I'm floating around inside my seatbelts. Just an amazing ride from Earth to orbit, but it's a rocket, and that's what it's supposed to do. My position was mission specialist. It's kind of like a civilian flight engineer. I'm part of the flight deck crew. The shuttle was actually operated by 3 people, the commander, the pilot, and the flight engineer. But my other position was EVA. I was assigned to perform spacewalks, or extravehicular activities. On my first flight, I performed my first EVA. Spacewalking is unlike anything you can imagine here on Earth because you put a suit on and go outside of the vehicle. The suit itself is very big and bulky. It weighs 350 pounds here on Earth. In orbit, it doesn't weigh anything, but you still have the 350 pounds of mass in addition to your body mass that you're attempting to move around. So the suit is big and bulky, and all of your movement is done by hand and forearm. We say space walking, but you're not really walking any place. You're moving yourself around with your hands, moving that big bulky suit. When you're outside and you're going around the Earth, you circle it every 90 minutes. So you've got 45 minutes in direct sunlight, and you can be very, very hot, or 45 minutes on the dark side in in the shade, and you can be very, very cold, minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The suit attempts to regulate your body temperature, maintain temperature, but the extremes are just that, extreme, and the suit can't necessarily keep up. So you can manually adjust the temperature on your suit, and also you can adjust your activity. If you're working hard, you build up a heat load and you're hot. If you slow down a little bit, you cool down, the same here as on Earth. When you view the Earth and the solar system from outside the vehicle, it is absolutely fantastic. I can remember my very first spacewalk, exiting the hatch and then floating up to the side of the walls in the payload bay. I grabbed the handholds and I pulled myself up, and I looked over and down at the Earth, and I could see just how fast we were moving over the Earth and see how far below me the surface was. And I had the sensation I was falling. I was just going to tumble over and hit the ground. Well, of course, you are falling. That's how you stay in orbit. You're literally falling around the Earth. But when you see it, you're outside and you see it with your own two eyes, it's just just an incredible experience that it's difficult to express in words.
Main engine start. 5, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia on a mission combining science and the practical aspects of space.
My second mission was on the Space Shuttle Columbia. On that mission, I performed 2 EVAs. We carried a 3,000-pound, $10 million solar observation satellite called Spartan. And our job was to take that satellite into space, to deploy it, back away from it for 48 hours. You know, we go off and do other things. During that 48 hours, the satellite would make measurements of the sun's corona. Then we would fly back up to it, grab it, put it into the payload bay, and bring it home. Well, the satellite did not initialize properly. Its attitude control system did not initialize properly, and it developed a very slow spin in space. So you've got a satellite, 3,000 pounds, about the size of a small car, very slowly turning in space. And so it was slow motion, 3,000-pound thing, sort of wobbling all over space. Because it was turning, we couldn't catch it with the robot arm because it's moving. So after several days of consultation, it was decided that to retrieve it, my buddy and I would go out and catch it by hand. We got our spacesuits on, we exited the airlock, and we again locked our bodies into place on opposite sides of the space shuttle. So I'm on one side and my buddy is on the other side. We lock our boots into foot restraints to hold our bodies in place and have our hands free. Our commander flew the rendezvous up to the satellite, and we stopped and we watched it for a while. We wanted to be sure that its motion had dampened enough that would allow us to catch it. If it's moving too fast, obviously we couldn't catch it. So we watched it for a while. The ground was analyzing its motion and so on. Finally, we were giving a go from mission control to capture the satellite, and then I directed my buddy and I to actually reach up and grab it, and then repositioning our hands, then rotate it forward and locking into the payload bay. All of that took about 3.5 hours of the first EVA to effect that capture. But we did get it, we locked it down, we brought it home, and it was repaired and sent up on a subsequent mission. Following the 3.5 hour satellite capture, we went ahead with other EVA tasks. So that EVA was, at that time, was one of the longest ones. It was almost 8 hours long. I had a 30-minute warning light illuminating on my suit telling me that one of my consumables was getting low. It's time to stop and go back inside. If you're outside for 6 hours, you've been cooped up in the suit for 8 or 9 hours because you enter the suit a couple of hours before you actually go outside. Then once you come back inside, it's another 30 minutes or so before you can actually take the suit off. The prep time and the pre-EVA time and the post-EVA time is very long. So many things on that on both missions, but on the second mission, obviously, that we were excited to do that I could go on and on and on and on. I'll tell you about one other one. This is a really interesting one. We had a device called AirCam Sprint. AirCam is Autonomous EVA Robotic Camera. There's an acronym for everything. AirCam. The little free fly unit, it was called Sprint. It looks like a soccer ball, like a giant soccer ball, but it's really a robot. And its eyes were stereoscopic television cameras. Our job was to test this robot. The idea is that if you have to inspect the outside of your spaceship or space station, you can send the robot. Everything it sees would be beamed back into the shuttle, back into mission control or space station or whatever. Then if you detect damage, you can send people out to repair it. So this is the first time this thing has been flown. I launched it. Our pilot flew it around through a test profile for, an hour or 45 minutes, an hour or something like that. And it actually took pictures and beamed the pictures back into the shuttle. Then at the end of the test, he flew it back to me. I caught it, powering it down, and brought it back inside. So that was really a fun project to perform in orbit. And again, it's the first time anything like that had ever been done in space. Unfortunately, they did not continue to use the Sprint as a tool. In fact, when we lost Columbia in 2003, and the investigators went back and reviewed it, that subject came up. Had that Columbia crew had the Sprint on board, they quite possibly could have used it to detect the damage to the outside of the shuttle that led to the disaster. But as in true fashion, budget cuts prevented further development of that device, and then Columbia did not have it on board in 2003. The thing that really surprised me the most in space was continuous weightlessness. There's nothing you can do to prepare for continuous weightlessness. We can train to operate systems. We can train to do experiments. We can train to do all kinds of things, but you can't train for continuous weightlessness. It's mundane. I mean, that's the environment you're in. It's there all the time, but you can't practice for it. It's fun in a way because you get to fly across the room and float and do somersaults, but it's also uncomfortable because your body was not meant to live in continuous weightlessness. All kinds of things happen to you when your body is adjusting, and some of it is quite uncomfortable until you get used to being up there.
Just 2 minutes now until touchdown.
Re-entry is different from ascent. Ascent, as I just said, was 8.5 minutes long. It's really fast. Things go by very, very, very quickly. Re-entry, on the other hand, is a longer, more gradual process. You're in orbit, you're weightless, it's time to re-enter.
4, 3, 2, 1. Deorbit Burn start.
We do what's called the Deorbit Burn on the opposite side of the Earth, somewhere over the Indian Ocean. And what you have to do to come home, to bring the space shuttle home, is you have to slow it down and allow gravity to pull it down into the atmosphere. Well, it doesn't have brakes. So the way you slow it down is you turn it around backwards and fire the orbital maneuvering system's engines. So if it's moving backwards, you fire the engine, it slows it down. Gravity starts to pull it into the atmosphere, but it's backwards. So you have to flip it around forward again so it re-enters at the appropriate attitude. So, okay, we do the deorbit burn, and then and gravity starts to pull it down, and about 20 minutes or so after you do the burn, you begin to feel the atmosphere. It's called entry interface. You can begin to feel the vehicle start to slow down. And as it slows down, as it decelerates, the effect of gravity is very gradual. It gradually exerts itself on you. So as you touch the atmosphere, your suit starts to get heavier and heavier. Your body is feeling heavy. Your helmet's pushing down on you. Your suit, everything's pushing you down in the seat as the vehicle decelerates. Also, the space shuttle would perform S-turns because you want to dissipate all of that energy in a controlled manner, but hit a spot on the ground on the opposite side of the Earth. So in order to help dissipate the energy, it would turn one direction for a while and then turn another direction for a while to give it more distance to slow down to hit that spot. And of course, the computers are typically flying here, but we're monitoring to be sure that the computers are doing what they're supposed to do. We don't want to get too far off course because we won't get back one direction or another. You also want to be sure the angle of attack is correct. At one point during the reentry profile, you're going so fast through the atmosphere that the air actually ionizes outside. So you've got this bright orangish yellowish glow outside. It's hot plasma, simply because you're going so fast through the air. The temperature outside is in the thousands of degrees. We're comfortable inside because the environmental control and life support system is working properly. Also, we have our launching entry suits on. But to look outside, you're right inside this big ball of fire, this fireball, a hot ball of plasma. Just absolutely incredible sight. Pretty soon you pass through that, and then some minutes later, you're low enough in the atmosphere that you can look out and see the cities below you. Now they're a couple of 100,000 feet below you, but you can see the cities below you. I remember looking out and seeing Houston below me at, I don't remember, 100,000 feet or thereabout. Then 10 minutes later, we're overhead Kennedy Space Center making our turn onto final to land on the runway. Again, it's an incredible experience to re-enter the atmosphere, and it lasts over a significant period of time. And I can remember as we turned on to final approach to land on the runway, you can look out and see the interstate below you, see the cars beneath you as you enter final. The final approach is very, very steep. It's 7 times steeper than an airliner. So it's kind of like almost like a dive bomber coming out of orbit. But then, and the commander is doing the flying at this point. The commander will initiate a flare, that is to slow the rate of descent. The pilot will lower the landing gear, and then we come down to a nice, smooth touchdown on the runway, typically here at Kennedy Space Center. And after my second flight, I remained with NASA for another 1.5 years, 2 years. And at that point decided it was simply time to go do something else. I had some other offers on the table, and I had been in aviation as a career field for 27 years. And I was ready to make a change. It was a decision that I had to think long and hard about, because I contemplated staying and doing another space mission. And it was my choice. Had I stayed, I would have flown again, I'm sure. I would have had a space station assembly flight. But I had some other offers, and I decided, well, I've had great experiences in space. I've done everything you can do in space at that time. We weren't sending people to the moon or anything, or to the space station. So I decided to leave. But when you leave active astronaut duty, you don't leave being an astronaut. That's something that never stops. Even now, in my daily life, my astronaut experience is what dominates my life. So it's almost like you never leave the program. With the exception of training, actually flying in space, I've never left the program, because that's what dominates my life. The greatest thing that I got out of my experience is being an astronaut. That's a very difficult question, because it's a philosophical one. The easy answer would be the greatest thing was flying in space. And of course it was. The greatest physical experience was actually leaving the Earth and flying in space and seeing the Earth from space. But if I look at it on a broader level, I think the greatest thing I got from my space experience was the life experience in space and what it does for you for the rest of your life. It positions a person such that they can influence others. They can influence not just children, but adults, policy, your country. You've done something that only a handful of people have done in the history of humankind, and it puts you in a unique position that allows you to contribute to life and contribute to others. I think that's the greatest thing that I got from my space flight.